Naturally, the world of astrology is very interested in the truly unique aspect of Vedic astrology, which is the Nakshatras, its lunar mansions. So let's make a video where we explain the roots of the Nakshatras. Astronomically speaking, what are the astronomical roots? The Nakshatras are basically known as fields of sidereal space, 27 fields of 13 degrees 20 minutes each. What fewer people realize is that each one of these fields is tied to a particular group of fixed stars, and that each one of those groups of fixed stars has one particular chief star. The visible properties of those chief stars reveal a lot about the symbolic nature of the nakshatra field that they anchor. And what I want to do is draw a picture for you of where they are, east to west and north to south. Let me first just use a regular planetarium software to show you these stars using their modern astronomical names or their Western astronomical names. The chief star for Kritika is Eta Tauri. For Rohini, it's Alpha Tauri, which is also known as Aldebaran. For Mrigashirsha, it's Lambda Orion. And for Ardra, the chief star is Alpha Orion. Purnavasu's chief star is Beta Gemini, which is also known as Pollux. Pusha is Delta Cancer. Ashlesha is Sigma Hydra. Magha is Alpha Leonis, which is also known as Regulus. Purva Palguni is Delta Leonis, and Uttara Palguni is Beta Leonis. Then Hasta is Delta Corvi. Chitra, Alpha Virginis, which is Spica. Swati is Alpha Bootis, which is called Arcturus. Vishaka is Iota Libra. And Anuradha is Delta Scorpio. Jeshta is Alpha Scorpio, which is Antares. Mula is Lambda Scorpio. Purvashada is Delta Sagittarius. Uttarashada is Z Sagittarius. Abhijit is Alpha Lyra, which is Vega. Shravana is Alpha Aquilae, which is Altair. Shravishta is Beta Delphini. Shatabhishak is Lambda Aquarii. Purvabhadrapada is Sigma Pegasi. Uttarabhadrapada is Lambda Pegasi. Revati is Zeta Piscium. Ashwini Beta are Aries. And Bharani is 35 Aries. So that's cool to see the stars in the planetarium software like that. But let me show you a more conceptual depiction of where these stars lie in relation to the ecliptic, in relation to the plane that the sun moves on. Because the position of the stars in relation to the ecliptic tells you a lot about the nature of the nakshatra that the stars act as the anchor for. So Surya Siddhanta gives the latitudes and longitudes for the chief stars of the nakshatras. And here you see a table which translates those positions into latitudes and longitudes that we're familiar with, and then translates that into raw latitude and longitude minutes. Using those raw latitude and longitude minutes, we can produce this graph, which is just a basic scatter chart of the X and Y latitude and longitude. That black line there is the ecliptic. And what you can see is that some of these blue dots are right on the ecliptic. There's 4 of them that are basically right on the ecliptic. And some of them are really far off the ecliptic. There's one that's hanging out way up there, way north of the ecliptic. There's several that go really high north, a couple go really far south. Now in this graphic, I've divided the ecliptic longitude into those 13 degree 20 minute segments. So you've got 27 segments now marked out. And what this allows us to see is how these stars basically correspond exactly to the 27 segments. In this graphic, I'm adding latitude lines. In this graphic, now let's put names on all these stars. So you can start to see a couple of very interesting groups and a couple of very interesting things. What is that star that's really far, far, far away from everything else? That's Abhijit. That's one of the reasons why it's not the same as all the rest of the nakshatras. It's so far north, just to give you an idea of how far north that is, that's the North Pole. At least depending on how the Earth's tilt is relating to the stars, at some points in history, that is literally the North Star, Abhijit. You can see some other interesting things, like the most furthest south nakshatras are Ardra, as number 1, and Mula. And these both belong to the same deity, Rudra. One is the female Rudra in Mula, and the male Rudra in Ardra. The destroyer is down at the greatest southern declination. Ashlesha. Ashlesha is also the serpent's nakshatra, so it's obvious how it's down. Mrigashirsha is also very low. So these nakshatras that are really low, they either have a very heavy feeling to them in their symbolism, which is like Ardra and Mula, and or they have a very mystical feeling or an unknown feeling or secretive feeling, which is really Ashlesha and a bit of Hasta. Or they have a bit of like a deceptive or quiet or behind the scenes or passive aggressive type of nature to them, which is Mrigashirsha and Hasta, because they're south. The nakshatras that are very high, they have a different kind of feeling to them. This is like Bharani is at a peak, Uttara Palguni, Purva Palguni is at a peak, Swati is at a peak, Shravana, Shravishta, and the 2 Bhadrapadas are peaking. They're very high up north. The feeling behind those nakshatras, what they all have in common is they have a lot of aspiration, they have a lot of loftiness to them, or they bear down on other people. They bear down, like Bharani bears down from a higher position. Swati bears down, doesn't just go with the flow. It tries to either regulate like Bharani or disapprove, disagree, like Swati. Purva Bhadrapada also. Uttara Bhadrapada is kind of doing both, looking down on one thing, looking up at the other thing. Whereas the other nakshatras that are really close on the ecliptic are about more like everyday. They have more of an everyday feeling to them, or they're practical. Kritika is about practical action. Rohini is about practical beauty and productivity. Punarvasu is interested in doing things, correcting practical things. It's a little bit high. It's a little bit of a corrector. Pushya is about practical success. Magha, practical power. Chitra, practical creativity, again, like Rohini. Vishaka, Anuradha, it's sex and love. Jeshta is a little bit lower, but it's pretty practical. And the 2 Ashadas also, they're pretty practical and they want to achieve practical things. They're a little bit lower and heavier. But see, the interesting thing about Shatabhishak is how it's holding down the 2 very high segments around the side. Shravana and Shravishta or Dhanishta, and then Purva and Uttara Bhadrapada are very far north, and Satabhishak is right on the ecliptic, and that is how Satabhishak is described in the Taittiriya Brahmana, which is that it ties the heavens to the earth, or it makes the earth from the heavens, so it's pulling the heavens down to earth, and you can see that very visually here, how it's trying to take lofty things and make them real and practical. Revati also has that valleyness to it. Revati is trying to take something very lofty as love and affection and put it into a practical expression. Now in this graphic, I have circled some of the outstanding weirdos or the unusuals. If you start with Ashwini and then Bharani, it's like, wow, these guys are almost literally 13 degrees 20 minutes apart. Kritika too, it's like exactly 13 degrees 20 minutes apart. Rohini is pretty close. Mrigashirsha also is pretty close. But look at Ardra, it's not in its expected position. It's quite close to Mrigashirsha. So Ardra looks like it has moved towards Mrigashirsha. And that is also how Ardra is described symbolically in the Taittiriya Brahmana, which is that it wants to protect the deer. It wants to protect the innocent creature. It's angry at the hunter of the deer. And that's the story. Brahma from Rohini is chasing Mrigashirsha, the deer, and Ardra comes and stops him. So there you see a visual, astronomical element to this symbolic concept and mythos of Rudra being the one who stops bad things from happening to innocent people. You could see about these The Phalgunis, Uttara and Purva pairs, they're usually in pretty much the same area. They're always in like the same area of space. They're not going to be far apart, because what they do, the Uttara and Apurva, they're two parts of one constellation. It's just that the constellation was bigger than 13 degrees 20 minutes, so they broke it in to cover 26 degrees 40 minutes. The next strange one, though, is Swati, and it's quite strange for two reasons. It's very far north, and it's very far to the left. So it's actually moved out of its own zone, and that's very important to understanding the symbolism of Swati, is that it leaves its place of origin, it goes someplace else, it gets out of its own culture, it gets out of its own family, it gets out of its own background, and looks for something else. It prefers to go towards Chitra's zone. It looks for something beautiful and true. And it also goes very far north. It doesn't like to be with the rest of its friends down there. Like, it's the opposite of Satyabhishak, where Satyabhishak has the partners, the neighbors are very high north, and Satyabhishak has moved away from them to the south. Swati is the opposite. Its partners are on the ecliptic, and it's moved away from them to the north. The next unusual situation is really Uttarashada and Abhijit and Purvashada. So you get Jeshta is a little bit moving towards Anuradha. Jeshta is desirous of the sexual pleasure that's potential in Anuradha. And you see how Vishaka and Anuradha are very close together, and those used to be thought of as a Purva and Uttara. It used to be Radha and Anuradha. Jeshta likes that couple and tries to come towards it, wants to enjoy it. Mula moves away from all that and goes down south to try to find the roots of things. Then Purvashada is now kind of on the left side of its zone, and Uttarashada, which makes a pair with it, is quite close to it. It winds up also being out of its box, like Swati's zone. So Uttarashada and Swati have something in common, which is being maverick and being individualistic and being a leader rather than a follower. And then it's almost on exactly the same longitude as Abhijit. But Abhijit is extremely north from it. So this is why the Taittiriya Brahmana says that Abhijit is a part of Uttarashada. And it's not a 28th segment. But the nature of the star of Abhijit is part of what creates the symbolic nature of the Uttarashada Nakshatra zone. So in other words, the Uttarashada Nakshatra zone can be thought of as having two yogatars. One is the Uttarashada yogatar itself, and the other is Vega Abhijit. And that's another reason why Uttarashada is very ambitious, lofty, and difficult to defeat, difficult not to argue with, etc. So that's about all I have in mind right now for discussing. I hope that you found this at least 10% of as interesting as I find it, and that it helps you really think about these nakshatras more concretely and understand what they represent. And this will also help you understand the statements of classical astrologers like Varaha Mihira when he talks about if a planet can move south of Magha, or if it goes through the middle of Magha, or if it's north of Magha. You can now visualize these things. So I hope that was great for you. And please subscribe and like it and give me a comment and all that kind of great lovey stuff. Thanks so much.